Hello and welcome to the Small Business Briefing. I'm Brian Calley, CEO of the Small Business Association of Michigan.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, and thanks for tuning in today. I'm Sarah Miller, Vice President of Communications at SBAM, and I want to welcome one of our new members, Joe Kylan of Muskegon Awning and Fabrication. He's a new VIP member. So welcome, Joe and team. All right, Brian, we have exciting news to start the show off with today regarding our CTA lawsuit. So I'll let you share the good news.
Yeah, finally. So we got some other news on the Corporate Transparency Act as well. But I've been telling you for a couple months, any day now, we'll have a decision on our lawsuit, SBAM versus the IRS, challenging the constitutionality of the Corporate Transparency Act. And we received this decision today. And get this, we won. And what's awesome about how we won is not just that we made the case and won the lawsuit, but we won it on constitutional grounds. It wasn't some obscure technicality. It wasn't like a win in name only. Like it was like right down the center. The decision was on the basis of the Fourth Amendment. The judge did find that the Corporate Transparency Act requirements of reporting for criminal investigations by people that are not suspected of doing any wrongdoing constitutes an illegal search. And so I've got the decision right here, and it says the last sentence in a 25-page decision says the Corporate Transparency Act amounts to an unreasonable search prohibited by the Fourth Amendment. That's as kind of solid a decision as you can get. And while there's been other lawsuits, several other lawsuits, most of those lawsuits, the decisions have been based on injunctions, like temporary injunctions on the enforcement of the Corporate Transparency Act. And this is the first decision that is really based on a trial. We went through the whole process, the oral arguments, the written arguments, the briefs back and forth, and then a final decision by a federal judge. And so we were very, very pleased to get this decision finally. And what it really means is that that this talk about some about the future, but at least at the moment, that the government cannot require that people turn over sensitive personal information for the purposes of a criminal investigation without any sort of probable cause. And so this is it really is in a lot of ways, it's not a Supreme Court decision, so I can't call it landmark, if you will, but it's maybe someday it'll be that. But really, this is exactly what we were looking for, exactly what we were hoping for. Of course, we wanted to win, but we wanted to win based on a constitutional provision, which is the strongest possible protection that we can have.
All right, let's back up just a little bit. There's actually some guidance from FinCEN on Friday. And then this morning, before our judgment came in, the IRS had announced kind of a whole new direction for the CTA. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so parallel what's happening is the IRS and Scott Bessent, who's the Secretary of Treasury, announced that that FinCEN and the IRS were pulling back the current rule that was previously passed. And apparently they believe that the Corporate Transparency Act allows for them to make exemptions of businesses that or entities that are that they deem to be lower risk. And what they've announced is that not only are they not going to enforce for now, and they're not going to ask anybody to report until a new rule is filed. They also said what they intend to do with the new rule, and they will publish a new rule that says it will only apply to foreign entities that are doing business in the United States. So in other words, not applying it to US citizens. In a way that the way that I'm receiving this, now I don't have insider information. I've not talked to Secretary Bessent. I've not, but what that could mean is they look at it and say, you know what, we actually cannot require this information of US citizens because it's a violation of their constitutional rights. So in other words, they might be acquiescing to the framing that we would like this to be viewed in, which is that it's an illegal search. The but nevertheless, it means that nobody needs to comply with this law right now. There will be a new rule eventually published, and somebody will have to comply with this new rule in the future. And it looks like that'll be much, much more narrowly defined. So that's a great outcome. So you might ask the question, what difference does this lawsuit that SBAM just won make then? And it is, I would submit to you that it's still important because while the Trump administration is pulling back on this rule, in other words, they're pulling back the rule and they're going to issue one that is much more narrowly tailored. The fact that the law itself is still on the books and the fact that what is happening now is happening through administrative action means that any future administration could put the old rule back in place or could go out and require additional, essentially put the original Corporate Transparency Act provisions or rule back in place. If it's taken away by administrative order, it can be put back by administrative order. So it's much better to have a decision. But I don't know exactly where we go from here. Number one, I don't know if the government's going to appeal our win. I don't know if they're going to enter into a settlement negotiation. Maybe they will essentially agree that it's unconstitutional and look for a settlement where the parties say, yeah, foreign entities having to report are fine, but no U.S. or domestically domiciled entities unless they have some sort of probable cause from a court of law. This, like that sort of thing, we don't know which direction it'll go. But one thing that we do know is for now, nobody needs to comply with this law, and it is really the other thing too. It's actually the first time we've ever done this. We've never done a lawsuit like this, and it's kind of nice to win. I don't know if that means we're just going to do another one, but because they're pretty expensive. But but it is nice for as much time and energy and effort has been spent on it. Great to have a win.
Absolutely. Definitely cause for celebration. All right, let's stick with a few more federal issues for now. And all right, so Brian, has it been 30 days already? What do you expect to happen with tariffs on Canada and Mexico?
Yeah, it kind of dropped out of the news, and I feel like people mostly forgot about it. But it wasn't when the president had proposed tariffs on Mexico and Canada at 25% and then China at 10%. Right before they went into effect, they were postponed 30 days for Mexico and China and Canada. The ones for China just went into effect. The 10% for China just went into effect. The 25% for our neighbors to the north and the south, there were certain things that the administration was looking for, and apparently what happened was that there were certain conditions that were met. And some of those conditions had to do with either drug trafficking or border security. And so I'm sort of expecting sometime between today and tomorrow that there'll be some sort of declaration that enough progress has been made on previous promises that the deadline will be extended again. But there has been so little conversation about this that I don't have any particular insight. I just know that there hasn't been any sort of public feuding about it. So if there are disagreements or promises that were made 30 days ago that have not been kept or progress made on them, they haven't really risen up to be much of a public discussion. So I'm sort of expecting another extension, or maybe they get taken off the table, or perhaps there's way more happening in the background than what we know. Maybe some disputes have risen, and there could be some tariffs that go into effect. So I guess we'll have to wait and see. But while it has fallen off most people's radar screens in the last several weeks, I think is probably going to be a pretty big topic of conversation today and tomorrow.
All right, let's move on to another topic, but this is still at the federal level. We're a few weeks out at that level from the need for a new budget, or we will be facing a shutdown. What are your predictions?
Yeah, we just a couple weeks out, and so they're either going to need a continuing resolution, or they could do a budget to take them through the end of the department fiscal years. And lately, it's been more continuing resolutions. that have been utilized, but there are some pretty big disagreements between the parties, and also disagreements within the Republican conference in Congress. So while the Republicans have the numbers, majorities in both chambers, they don't have a majority that can break a filibuster in the Senate, and there's enough dissent among House Republicans that it's difficult for them to put together a majority that get on the same page. So conventional wisdom is that a real impasse is more possible. Apparently, there was it was reported that negotiators between the White House and the in Congress walked away from the table over the weekend and just weren't able to make progress. So the president has said certain entitlement programs are off the table: Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. There's others that believe that there's no way you get to a balanced budget without making changes in those areas. So that's one part of the impasse. Um, Democrats have been willing to help before on these, but what they're looking for is a more explicit prohibition against impoundment of budgets. So it's been, you've probably seen in the news, freezing spending and making layoffs and that sort of thing, canceling contracts. And Democrats are saying, yeah, maybe we can help you with a budget, but we're going to look for more explicit language that prohibits the executive branch from canceling spending or contracts. So you can see how there's some that want to preserve spending. There's some that want to make kind of more modest cuts and leave the entitlements alone. And there's some that say you got to touch the entitlements to really get to a balanced state. Three different groups. None of those three groups have enough to make that to have their way at this point. So as with a lot of things, a deal doesn't come together in the political system. A deal doesn't come together till a deal has to come together. So I'll be surprised if you see anything this week. I think next week there'll be a lot of drama, a lot of kind of back and forth on it, and probably something happens next week to move it. But at this point, it is not clear where the first place to give is. Will it be more of a solution where Speaker Johnson brings some Democrats on board to make a deal? Or do they have to do a Republican only deal? And then how do they get that through the Senate? Really big questions here. And I think this is one that it seems like the forces at play are a little more dug in than what we've seen in the last couple of years as we have approached the end of spending authorizations.
All right, there has been some disagreement within the IRS and between different agencies lately. What's the source of that conflict?
Yeah, in the IRS, really I've seen this a lot in the news, and I wanted to cover this because there's because it is kind of puzzling if you don't really kind of look under the hood, like what's really the disagreement here? And the disagreement has to do with who has access to what information and what is it used for. So a couple of the more high profile efforts right now, or the high profile demands, is it's not unusual for somebody who is in the US to have access or to work and pay taxes, but pay taxes with somebody else's social security number, maybe an old one tied to a person who's deceased, that sort of thing. And so immigration has long since wanted to be able to take their information and cross-reference it with tax returns to identify people that don't have legal status here in the United States. That's one of them. So does immigration have access to tax return and tax payment information? So there's a dispute happening between agencies on that. There's another one, which is while the entitlement programs, there's some sense that say Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security shouldn't be touched. There's also a belief among some that if you were to cross-reference, those systems don't talk either. IRS and income data with the qualification criteria that within the social service programs, that if they could cross-reference those two things, that they would identify potential fraud or inappropriate payments in the social services, and not cut eligibility, but find people that are uneligible but still drawing benefits. So those are two examples where there's a big confrontation within different departments, who has access to what information, how well these systems talk to each other. There are some laws, by the way, that dictate some of this in terms of what information could be used for what purposes. But of all the information within our system, the information that's hardest to get at or to get access to is taxpayer information, the Treasury data. There is an act that specifically governs it, and it can be used for other purposes, but traditionally the agency has been has kept it clamped down. And then the backdrop of this was that an IRS contractor had recently, I mean, within a few years ago, but had essentially illegally obtained and published some tax returns, or illegally obtained about 700,000 individuals, including the president. And so remember, there was a tax return of the president, or some tax returns of the president that were published a few years back, a data breach that came to light in the middle of all of this as well. So many different aspects of this. A lot of it's like a lot of ups and downs, a lot of arguments over the next months. It'll be months of this type of kind of up and down and back and forth that you see before it settles into some sort of a new norm. But this interagency competition for who has access to what information and what it's used for is something that it hasn't happened and something like this really hasn't happened in a while. And so it will be as an observer of it, it'll be fascinating how how they end up settling it in the end. But I think ultimately probably going to be settled in the courts because some of these questions have really never been asked in the way they're being asked right now.
All right, well, time will tell. All right, so this was just last Wednesday, the State of the State. Kind of feels like a little bit longer than that. But I was curious, Brian, what your big takeaways were from her State of the State address.
I actually took notes of the State of the State as I was watching it, and the chair of our board, Eric Stewart, was present and in attendance on the floor in person to hear the State of the State address. Always a big deal as the governor lays out the agenda for the coming year. And so I've got 5 takeaways here I want to share with you. The first is an emphasis on bipartisan and collaboration. She spent a lot of time in the beginning of the speech talking about working across the aisle, working with the Trump administration, a different posture than you've seen from a lot of Democratic governors around the country. So it was I thought that she kind of went out of her way to make a statement like, just going to try to keep on getting work done here in Michigan, and I'll work with whoever I have to do so. And gave some, and I'd say the most high profile example being the new administration in Washington. There was a focus also on rising costs in certain ways. She highlighted housing, something that we've really been zeroed in on as well. 50% increase in the price of homes over the course of the last 4 years. So she had proposed a program to buy, build, or fix nearly 11,000 homes, and then also addressed some issues on medical debt, energy, childcare, and this was all in a section talking about rising costs. I will say that she also did tie this tariff discussion in, saying that tariffs would raise costs as well. So while it was, I thought she kind of went out of her way to show just a willingness to work with Trump. Also on tariffs, certainly delivered a message of pushing back at least some, modest, but some. There was also with Reconnect, a program that we've worked on here at SBAM, supported its development in the beginning and implementation here in Michigan. So adults going back to school, higher education, skilled training. She highlighted some gender disparities, and we've used to, when people talk about gender disparities, we're used to talking about women as opposed to men. But when it comes to going to college, actually, men going to college has been plummeting. And so the governor did bring that up and setting a goal for that, and also home ownership. Those two areas where just as young men are entering the workforce and becoming adults, that their success in going to college and achieving home ownership has actually been falling here in Michigan. And so anyway, focusing on that. I would say probably the biggest area that she focused on was roads, in terms of like the most like substantive change. Like, hey, here's something that needs to happen. She did point out that Matt Hall, the Speaker of the House, had put out a plan. His plan doesn't have any new taxes in it. She did suggest that that wasn't realistic, that there had to be some taxes. And I thought the worst part of the speech was when she said, essentially putting the business community on notice, hey, business community, we're not going to just fix roads and put it on the backs of middle class. And I was kind of disappointed in that, because number one, it means that, we already knew she was proposing a specific business tax increase for roads, but also, I mean, small businesses are the middle class. So I don't like this idea of business versus the middle class. The majority of people that own businesses are the middle class. And so raising taxes on them is putting it on the middle class. Also, the provider half the jobs, again, many of which comprise the middle class. And then education and public health initiatives. I'd say probably the biggest shiny object was the idea of limiting cell phone usage in school, or prohibiting cell phone usage in school among kids, and then taxing vaping products, and taxing them apparently pretty close to what cigarettes are taxed on, which is a high rate. Most of what you pay for a pack of cigarettes, I think, is actually the taxes. So those were the things that I kind of took away. It was a longer speech, but also she spent a lot of time in the beginning on that kind of bipartisanship message. And so there weren't like a lot of new policy initiatives that were included in it. The biggest one, well, fixing roads is great, but not with business specific taxes. We prefer, as you might imagine, broader usage-based fees that, the more you use the roads, the more you pay taxes, much like registration fees or gas taxes. Those seem like an appropriate way, as opposed to a business-specific tax. So a little disappointed in that, but otherwise, a lot of proposals that were plenty of common ground, where I'm sure that we could find areas where we could work to help achieve some of the governor's agenda over the next year.
All right, well, thanks for your insight. I know you, Kelly, and Jacob will keep us all up to date moving forward. Okay, it's time for 2026 election watch.
All right, there are three things that caught my attention. So those that are either expected to run for office, I'm mainly looking at those running for governor, but also U.S. Senate. And I would and so John James, Congressman John James, he has run for statewide office a couple of times, and the Detroit News did an interview with him, and he said that he was flattered to be in the conversation of potential GOP candidates seeking the office of governor in 2026. And here's the quote: "I have been approached by a number of people, but right now my focus is on Selfridge. My focus is on repatriating American manufacturing jobs to Michigan. My focus is on lowering prices for Michiganders." Sounds like a gubernatorial candidate to me. So those are the sorts of things that you would say. To be fair, you'd say him as a congressman too, but to acknowledge, he certainly didn't say no. He hasn't announced yet, so I think that he's seriously considering it. And he says, when he was pressed on it, he said, "I'm sure we'll keep you posted as things develop," as he told the news. So first was John James did nothing to dissuade the media from considering him a candidate, and the way he delivered his answer sounded like somebody who would want to keep that door open to me. And next was Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson. So keep in mind that you got to win a primary before you win a general election. And so with Secretary Benson, she had made it into the news opposing what's called the SAVE Act, and it changes. It's a the or I'm sorry the yeah, let's see, the Safeguard American Voter Eligibility, the SAVE Act. That is a federal proposed law, and it would require proof of citizenship to vote. And she came out saying that that would make it administratively very difficult for people to register to vote. And you might think, well, driver's license, but actually, driver's license is no longer a proof of citizenship, and because a lot of states don't require proof of citizenship to get a driver's license. And so you're talking about something like a birth certificate, or in conjunction with a proof of residency, which a driver's license would be that, but with a birth certificate or a passport. And just a couple of examples, but that's the sort of thing where most of the time people would kind of try to stay away from issues like that when they're because it's a sticky issue. If you want to get the nomination, you got to be in one place, but the general election voters are probably in a different place. Um, but she actually didn't hold back a bit. She went right leaned right into it. And she's of course an election administration person, so she's very comfortable with it. And but what that sounded like somebody was seeking a Democratic nomination for governor. So the way that she had answered it, and gave answers that were more about the administration of it as opposed to principle of it. Again, that's how you would probably want to handle it if you know that the general election folks are probably okay with the principle, so you got to make the case on the administration of it. And then Mike Duggan. So Mike Duggan, mayor of Detroit. Mike Duggan, who is running for governor as an independent here in Michigan. He put his final budget for the city of Detroit out, and it has in it a 3 millage property tax cut. 3 mills, reducing it by 3 mills. And so this is tax cuts are the sorts of things you might do if you're trying to get ready for a run, especially in a city like Detroit, where their millage rate is 67 mills. A lot of the communities around Detroit are 40 to 50 mills. So it's pretty high. And $100,000 house. And yeah, in Detroit, there's lots of houses in the 100,000 or less. It'd be about $150 a year is what a 3 millage rate difference would make. Of course, if you have a higher priced house, it makes a bigger difference. So that caught my eye too, as something that I don't recall being proposed before, but definitely the sort of thing that a person aspiring to run for governor might put on the table. So those are three that stuck out to me. Of course, there's others that are out there doing things too, but those are three that stuck out to me, where two of the three are already announced candidates, and the other one I think wants to, and it's just not quite time yet. I will say too that most time it makes sense to get in the race early if you are going to run for governor in a state like Michigan. John James has run a couple times statewide already, and I think that he probably does have more time than the average candidate. He could, in other words, catch back up getting in later. So I think he's probably taking that time, especially since, in case you haven't noticed, things have been very, very busy in Washington.
All right, thanks, Brian, and thanks everybody for tuning in today. We will be back here next Monday at 3 o'clock. Have a great week.
Thanks, everybody. See you next time.